Hello, I'm Nick Payne, and today I'm going to talk about something I'm going to be using whilst I'm here consulting this week, next week, and it's called the seven flows. So the seven flows are literally raw material, work in process, finished goods, operators, machines, information, and engineering. And we consider each one a flow because what we do is when we're setting up a project or production line, bearing in mind that most things these days, in what I've seen, is whether it's maintenance or manufacturing, tends to be short runs or projects of some sort of description. There's not many people now that can make the same sort of thing year on year on year. Even cars these days, they're only making for a run of a maximum 4 years, pretty much, before they have to change the mark of the car or drastically change it to keep the customer interested. Okay, so if I'll briefly run down what each one of them means, what it means to me when I'm trying to help someone set up a project or production line, or as I'm working with at the moment is in maintenance. So first one we said was raw material. So raw material is everything we need, including consumables, to actually get the work done. So the one thing is to say, okay, what do we need? Understand what we need for everything. Um, the second thing we need to consider is how soon can we get hold of it. Another thing we need to consider is if that's going to be a long time, do we buy all of the stuff we need in one go, or do we want to get it fed in piecemeal, like more of a frequent delivery? Yeah, that can depend on what the material is. It depends on how big it is and how much you trust your suppliers and the time it's going to take to get to you and where in the world it's going to come from. So a lot of things feed into that. And then we have to think about for raw material is where is it going to go? Are we going to store the bulk of it in a warehouse sort of situation, and then have a usable amount on the shop floor or in the workspace? And then if that's going to be the case, how are we going to trigger a resupply? Are we going to use Kanban, etc., etc.? So there's lots of consideration for raw materials. Next thing we talk about was work in process. So from the minute a job order is released, it becomes work in process. So how does that move through the production or maintenance or production system? Does it physically move, or does the work come to a point and it's just done in totality before it's shifted off out? So we have to think about that, and if we are going to move it, how is it going to be moved? Are we going to need equipment, machinery, or is it going to be manual handling? And if it is, can we avoid manual handling? Because as we know, that can be a health and safety risk. So that might help us to think about what can we do to help the people do the job. What goes hand in hand with that is the flow of finished goods. Are we going to, once the job is finished or complete, are we just going to move it into a warehouse, or is the item going to go straight out the door? If that's the case, how is it going to get to the customer? Does it need to be put on some sort of transport? Who's going to do that? How often do they need to be told? What's their lead time to trigger them to do the stuff? Are we going to do it ourselves? Do we need vehicles to do that? Lots of things to consider there. The fourth one I mentioned was the flow of operators. So that's the people doing the work. Are they going to be stuck in one spot? Are they going to move? How are they going to move? Are there any health and safety implications? Are we going to do it on one shift? Are we going to do it across a whole spread of shifts? What skills do we need these people to have? Do they need certain physical characteristics? So all the things relating to people. Do we need to trigger HR to recruit more people? Do we need to go to an agency to get us people? Do we need to think about training them and onboarding them? Do we need to sort out our induction? So there's a lot of things we can think of there. The next one was the flow of machines. So do we need machinery and equipment to do this work? If so, what do we need? Do we have it? Do we need new stuff? Do we need to hire stuff? Um, are those machines, is their performance going to be affected by the task that we're trying to get them to do? Is the maintenance going to be affected? Do we need any particular dies? Um, Specialist equipment. Do we need specialist equipment for this stuff? If we do, where are we going to get it from? What's the lead time? Is there any calibration requirements? All those sort of things. So plenty to be thinking on there. And then we think of the flow of information. How are we going to get the people know what they need to do? How are the people going to know how to do it? How are we going to get information from the people back through to the management of the system so we know the system's operating correctly? What's our meeting structures going to look like? What have we got in place if something doesn't quite work as we thought it was going to do? All this information flow. Yes, we might have production information, but okay, what other information do we need to feed people? Do they have health and safety information? Is there social information? Plenty of stuff like that, like newsletters that we can do it. Do people need to have internet access? Do they need additional logons? So again, you've got these flows actually cross-connect each other. So you've got information, you're going to involve people in that. Also, you've got machine performance. So, okay, is it information to feed back on the performance of the machine to the relevant people so we know and are confident it's operating correctly? And then the seventh one was the flow of engineering. So, engineering, especially in manufacturing, are we comfortable that the whole system is working correctly? Who do we go for advice if we see something that's a bit different or a bit odd? Do we need additional outside support for the machinery that we've got, especially if it's new? Is the building fine? So there's lots. So what we're looking at when we say engineering is what specialist information do we need to do? Who's going to give it to us? How do we contact them? And then what do we do once we've got that information that they've got or expertise? Okay, so that's based on a typical manufacturing or maintenance sort of environment. But you could use it if you worked in something like a hospital, but you swap out certain parts of it depending on what you've got. For example, 7 flows again related to hospitals or the medical sort of industry. Raw materials, okay, so the raw materials that we need for people are going to be different than it is for manufacturing, obviously. So we have to think about other stuff such as the specific stuff about bandages and medicines and blood, lots of things like that. So that's related to medical hospitals. Flow of work in process. The work in process in the hospital scenario is people. So you can't just be leaving people in a big pile. Obviously, we've got to look after them. We've got to move them safely and correctly, especially if they're going through a work in process. So they might need to be getting to a hospital ward, getting from a ward to an operating theatre or to a specialist room, etc., etc. We think how we're going to do that, especially if they're not well or they're under medication. How are we going to do that? And again, the flow of finished goods. So how are we going to get the person that is going to be discharged from the ward out and safe, and how they're going to get home safe? Yeah. Then we got operators, where we're looking at nurses, doctors, orderlies, that sort of thing. Right? How are we going to get those around? What times of day are they going to come around? How are they going to do their work sequences? Flow of machines, okay, there's different machines in hospitals and equipment that's needed. You've got X-ray machines, you've got scanning machines, you've got lots of big stuff there. The equipment's different as well. Ward equipment will be different to operating theatre equipment. Then we've got information, so okay, there's a whole bunch of information required in the hospital. How are we going to get that to where it's needed? Are we going to use technology to get that information around? Are we going to use visual systems? Are we going to use charts, things like that? Used to see it on TV when I was a kid. They'd have things on the end of the bed that the doctor would look at. little charts with clipboards that people write on. Maybe that's still relevant these days. I don't know. Not been in hospital for a while. And engineering, so okay, we think about engineering in a hospital environment. You might think about specialists, because they have a deeper knowledge of certain parts of the body, more specific parts of the body, and how stuff works. Or you may think in terms of keeping power to the hospital, so how can we guarantee that the power's going to be there all the time so we don't get failures there, the air conditioning, or the lighting, all that sort of stuff. All sorts of things are important. So without being an expert in hospitals, using the 7 flows, it can trigger the right sort of discussions to enable you to set things up for success, and that's what we're after doing. And this is why planning is so very important in any sort of situation. Is we want to plan to succeed, and the 7 flows can help you to do that. So please feel free to leave in the comments your experience of setting up for success, or if you've been involved in stuff, had to do the work and found that it was, let's call it, less than ideal. So hit me off with that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.